I want to share with you for just a few minutes out of the book of Luke. If you'll pull that up, Stephanie. Luke chapter 19, verse 1 through 3. I just want to read you a couple verses real quick, and we'll just jump right into it here. Jesus entered Jericho and made his way through the town. And there was a man there named Zacchaeus. And he was the chief tax collector in the region. And he had become very rich. He tried to get a look at Jesus, but he was too short to see over the crowd. I want to take just a couple minutes and talk to you about Zacchaeus this morning. If you grew up in church and you grew up going to Sunday school and children's church, you might have heard a song that went something like, Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. I guess it was some kind of Irish jig that we did in children's church. I'm not sure. Don't use the word wee little man very often, but that's how the song went. Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. He climbed up in a sycamore tree for the Lord he wanted to see. I won't sing the whole song for you, but all we ever talk about is how short Zacchaeus was. And he was very short, but I want you to imagine, if you will, what Zacchaeus' life had been like up until this point. Up until this point where Jesus comes to town, what Zacchaeus' life might have been. You see, Zacchaeus was a publican. Now, a publican, I'd read that before, but I never really went in and looked at what it was. I just figured publican meant tax collector, and it kind of does. But this publican job was kind of a neat gig in a way, because what happened was the Romans had all of these towns and countries that they had that they were in charge of, and so these publicans would go and they would bid on the right to collect taxes for the Romans. The Romans had a set price that a certain area would have to pay. So Jericho was responsible for a certain amount of money. That Jericho had to bring in this much money. And the publicans would go and they would meet and they would bid to see who got to collect that much money for the Romans. You see, the deal was they said, we'll collect this much money, but anything they collected over that amount was theirs. So it was a very capitalist type society, and these publicans would go and they would bid, kind of like an auction. Well, you know, the set price is $1,000. Well, I'll collect $1,200. Well, I'll collect $1,500. And this went on until somebody maxed out, and then that person was responsible to pay the Romans that much money. However he could get it, wherever he could get it. If he just wanted to pay it out of his own pocket, he could do that. But he was responsible for that amount of money. But what would happen is the publicans would go around and then they would basically shake people down for the money. It was kind of a mobster type mentality. They would go and they would say, well, you export so much of this, and so you're going to have to pay me this much. And they would say, well, I don't have it. And they would hit them until they said they did have it. And it was that type of a mentality. They would get however much money that the publicans set. It wasn't something that came down from the Romans that so-and-so had to pay this much. It was whatever that publican seed fit to charge that person. So his friends probably didn't pay anything in taxes. Or the people that might have given him the right stuff, you know, the right goods, or taken care of him just right, they didn't really have to pay anything. But the people who didn't have a lot to offer Zacchaeus had to pay him probably a lot more than what they had. Now, I want you to imagine how you would feel about somebody who did that to you. I know that we all enjoy paying our taxes, and we all like that process very, very much. But at least it's not like it was in those days. It's not quite like that. Imagine what that guy had to go through. I mean, we say things about IRS and the IRS agents, and we make our jokes and we do those things, but at least they weren't like Zacchaeus. And Zacchaeus wasn't just somebody on a computer screen or somebody in Washington or somebody far away. Zacchaeus walked these streets every day. The people that he had shaken down see him every day. And though they might have feared him and they may have given him what he asked for, it wasn't so much that he was asking, it was what he demanded. And so you can see how maybe Zacchaeus wasn't the most popular guy in Jericho. Maybe he wasn't somebody that everybody was happy to see show up at the block party. Zacchaeus was a despised man because he was a publican. And not only was he a publican, but more than likely his father and his father before him were publicans. This was something that passed down, and so it was something that he had been brought up in all his life. So his entire life, not only Zacchaeus, but his whole family were despised by everyone around them. Rough place to be. And to top that off, as we hear in the little kid's song, he was a wee little man. He was short. I did some studying, and they said more than likely he was a dwarf, or what we would refer to today, to be politically correct, as a little person. Zacchaeus was more than likely a little person. And more than likely in those days, those types of people were probably made fun of a little bit. You know how vicious people are even today in our politically correct society when somebody is different than us. You know how vicious kids can be, and you know how vicious adults can be when someone is different than us. Zacchaeus was a small guy. Proportionally, he didn't fit what every other man was in that day. He looked different. He walked different. He did things differently because of his size. He had to make up for certain things because of the way that just God had made him. And so Zacchaeus started out being despised just because of who his family was, but then when he came out being different than everybody else, he lived his life being ridiculed. He lived his life being despised. He lived his life being made fun of. Imagine, if you will, growing up in that type of a setting. There may be people in this room that say, yeah, I can relate. I understand that perfectly. I know exactly what Zacchaeus was going through. But I think we can all imagine how rough of a life Zacchaeus would have had up until this point. And some of you might have a little trouble at this point sympathizing because you're saying, well, but John, he was a publican. He was mean and he was a nasty guy and he went around stealing money from people. He was basically a thief and a liar. That's all that Zacchaeus was. Yeah, but I would say to you, what made him that way? What made him be that? Why did Zacchaeus turn out the way that he was? It was because of what he was surrounded with every day. From the time he was a wee little man as a baby until he was a wee little man as a grown-up, he went through ridicule and he was despised his entire life. That has a tendency to make somebody mean. It has a tendency to make people not be pleasant to be around. And so Zacchaeus spent his whole life being hated and ridiculed. I want to set that out for you before we go on with this story. I want you to see what Zacchaeus had lived through his whole life. I don't know if you've ever been made fun of, but it's not fun. And some of you may have made fun of people before. I can raise my hand and say, I'm guilty. I've done that. Try not to anymore. But I've done that. And I've been on the receiving side of that. And it's one thing when you're just joking around between friends, but it's another thing when you are really being made fun of. When you are really being ridiculed. That's something altogether different. And it can have differing effects on different people. It can make you withdraw and just go inside yourself and stay away from people and stay away from situations where anybody may make fun of you. Or it can make you lash out. So instead of being attacked, you become the attacker. And Zacchaeus was probably fighting this battle every day of his life. He was short in stature, but more importantly, he had shortcomings in his own life. He was a thief. Even though he had full authority to take however much money he wanted to take from the Romans, Still what he was doing was morally wrong. He was taking from people who could not afford to give. He wasn't taking it because somebody was willingly giving it to him. He was taking it by force. It was morally wrong what he was doing. So he was a thief. He was a liar. He had to be. He had to be a liar. There's no way that somebody in Zacchaeus' position can go through his life telling the truth about everything and become a chief publican. He wasn't just a publican, he was a chief publican. He was a thief. He was a liar. He was selfish. He didn't care if you didn't have the money. He wanted the money. He wanted the money because the money was the only status that he had. He wasn't a big guy, but he could have big pockets. He wasn't a big guy, but he could have a big house. He could have the biggest chariot. He could have the biggest whatever he wanted because not only did he have his money, but he had yours too. That's the kind of guy that Zacchaeus was. But then something interesting happened. In verse number 4, something interesting happens. You see, Jesus shows up on the scene. Verse 4 says, "So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree beside the road, for Jesus was going to pass that way. And when Jesus came by, he looked at Zacchaeus and called him by name. 'Zacchaeus,' he said, 'quick, come down. I must be a guest in your home today.' Zacchaeus quickly climbed down and took Jesus to his house in great excitement and joy." I've heard it talked about before that what a miracle it was that Jesus walked up to Zacchaeus and he called him by name. He just happened to know the guy in the tree's name. What a miracle that was. But I think it might shine more to Zacchaeus' character than it does a miracle on Jesus' part. He was a chief publican. He was easy to identify because I'm guessing he might have been the only little person who was a publican. Do you think stories like that aren't going to get around? You think people aren't going to know about that stuff? You think people aren't going to be aware, including Jesus? You think nobody has talked to Jesus in town yet about this nasty guy Zacchaeus who steals all their money? Jesus sees Zacchaeus in a tree and he calls him by name. And I think Jesus called out Zacchaeus for a reason. I think he was drawn to Zacchaeus. I think there's a few reasons that Jesus was drawn to Zacchaeus. I think he was drawn by his desire. The fact that Zacchaeus really wanted to catch a glimpse of Jesus. Now think about it. Zacchaeus had enough money. He probably could have bought his way in front of Jesus somehow. But it seems to me that maybe Zacchaeus wanted something a little more there. He really wanted to catch a glimpse of Jesus kind of from the outside and see if this Jesus guy was the guy that everybody had said that he was. Because here's the deal, he was probably so polar opposite to what Zacchaeus was that Zacchaeus probably couldn't believe that Jesus was this guy that everybody said that he was. You're telling me there's this guy that walks around that doesn't sin, that does miracles, that heals the lame and heals the blind, heals the deaf. This guy that goes around and does all of this and he's not making any money off of it? Is he rich? What do you mean he's not rich? He doesn't own anything? If he can do these miracles, why is he not profiting off of this? Jesus' character was so polar opposite to what Zacchaeus' character was. Zacchaeus had to see if this guy was real. He had to see if this guy was legit. And so Zacchaeus went and did something out of his desire. He did something out of his desperation. Jesus was drawn because of his desire, and he was drawn because of his desperation. Think about this. This is Zacchaeus. This is the guy that's been made fun of all of his life because he's short and he's little and his stature's different than everybody else. But Zacchaeus, the Bible says that he ran ahead of the crowd. So as this crowd is going, trying to catch a glimpse of Jesus, here goes Zacchaeus taking the lead. He's not built like everybody else, so he probably doesn't run the same as everybody else. He probably looks a little bit different when he's doing that, and he puts himself out in front so that everybody sees him. So that everybody sees him running. So that everybody sees him running away. He's trying to get ahead. He's trying to get to a place where he can see Jesus, because everybody in the line hated him so badly that they wouldn't let him in. They hated him so badly he couldn't even push his way through the line. Now think about it. If you've got a line of people in front of you and they're just watching something, you can push your way through. You can push your way through. Some of our young people had that experience at Winter Jam. In a big long line of thousands of people, there were people that would just shove their way through a crowd. You can do it. People aren't expecting it, but he couldn't get through this line because those people intentionally did not want him to get through. I don't know that this is how it went down, but I almost see him locking arms and saying, buddy, this is the one thing we got, and you ain't getting through. So Zacchaeus, in desperation, runs ahead, puts himself in a place of ridicule, not only by running ahead, but by climbing a tree. Now, I don't know about you. When I was a kid, I loved to climb trees. I loved to go as high as I could get in a tree, to the point where it was fun getting there, but then when I looked down, I thought, I don't know if I can get out of this tree. It's kind of scary. Seems like the handholds and the toe holds are a lot easier to find going up than they are coming down. When you're a kid, all that fear kind of goes to the back of your head. And as adults, when we see kids climbing trees, we don't think anything about it. We have a lot of little boys that are bummed because our redbud tree out here, the limbs all broke off during the ice storm. They love to climb that tree. And you see kids climbing and you don't think a thing about it. But what would you think if you walked out one Sunday afternoon and I was sitting in the top of that redbud tree? You'd probably think, look out below, he's coming down. You don't think much when you see a kid in a tree, but when you see an adult in a tree, he better have a chainsaw. Or be making cookies with the elves or something. There has to be a reason for an adult to be in a tree. If he's not, you're going to think weird things about that guy. He needs to have a rifle or a chainsaw, one or the other. He needs to have something. There needs to be a reason, but Zacchaeus didn't have a reason. He was just up in a tree. This guy had been made fun of all his life, puts himself in another position to be made fun of. He was desperate, though. He wanted to see something. He wanted to see Jesus. And he wasn't going to let an obstacle of tall people, an obstacle of fast people, or an obstacle of a tree stand in his way. He had to get to a place where he could see Jesus. A little time with Jesus, just a little time with Jesus changed Zacchaeus. Jesus was drawn to him because of his desire and his desperation. And when Jesus showed up and he called Zacchaeus by name, whether it was a miracle or whether it was just because he'd heard of him, there was something about Jesus calling Zacchaeus by name. I'm guessing he didn't hear people call him by name very often. I think he heard people call him names very often. But I don't think he heard people call him by name. I think everybody had a name for him. And to those that he had power over, that name may have been Sir. Behind his back, it was probably a lot of other ugly words. But Jesus called Zacchaeus by name, and it got his attention. It got his attention because he called him by name. Verse 8 says, meanwhile, Zacchaeus stood before the Lord and said, I will give half of my wealth to the poor, Lord. And if I have cheated people on their taxes, I will give them back 4 times as much. Jesus responded, salvation has come to this home today, for this man has shown himself to be a true son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save those who are lost. Think about this. This greedy, lying, conniving little man that everybody despised, that everybody hated, changes his attitude. Nobody else has Zacchaeus ever told anything like that. If I cheated somebody on their taxes, I'll give them 4 times as much. Zacchaeus was probably as surprised to hear that come out of his mouth as anybody else was. But there was something about Jesus calling Zacchaeus and Zacchaeus responding that changed Zacchaeus' heart. Something changed in him when Jesus showed up on the scene. This man who not only was short in stature, but had fallen short in so many areas of his life, made a drastic change when Jesus showed up on the scene. When Jesus called him by name. When Jesus spent some time with him. When Jesus came to his house. There's some verses in between there that I skipped where it talks about how everybody in the crowd was angry that Jesus would go and be at somebody's house like that. Like Zacchaeus. Does he not know who Zacchaeus was? I think that's the important part. I think that's the reason that he called him by name. I think that's why Jesus called Zacchaeus by his name, was so that people would know who he was. So that people would know that he knew who he was. It was important because Jesus was proving a point. And the point is this: you have not fallen so short that I cannot pick you up. You have not fallen so short that I can't catch you and bring you to the place where you need to be. You have not fallen so short that I can't change your life for eternity. Jesus responded, "Salvation has come to this home today, for this man has shown himself to be a true son of Abraham," or son of God. "For the Son of Man came to seek and save those who were lost." Those who were lost. Not those who knew their way, not those who were on top of the world, not those who had everything put together. But Jesus came to seek and save those who were lost. Jesus came through Jericho to seek after Zacchaeus. Jesus came there looking for Zacchaeus, and he found him in a tree. That's where we lose track of Zacchaeus in this story. We see that he had this heart change, and then it's done. His life changed. You go back and you read some Christian history, they say that he went on to be a disciple of Christ. That he went on to go into full-time ministry, and his life was just forever changed. All because Jesus came through Jericho seeking somebody that was lost. Seeking Zacchaeus. He was willing to heal and to touch and to move in people's lives along the way, but Jesus had a plan for one person. And just like he did that day in Jericho, Jesus has a plan for one person this morning. And that one person is you. Each and every one of you. He has an individual plan for each and every one of you, and he's seeking out each and every one of you. And he's calling you by name. We know that he's able to do that because he said, "Before I formed you in your mother's womb, I knew you." He knew Zacchaeus. He knew Zacchaeus before Zacchaeus came out being a short man. He knew that he would be. And he knew what he would become. And he knew what he needed. And he knew that one day he would find him in a tree and he would change his life forever. And so I'm asking you this morning, Jesus is here and Jesus is seeking and he's searching for you. And where is he going to find you? And when he calls you by name, are you going to answer? You may be short in stature or you may be tall in stature. Nonetheless, he's looking for you. He's seeking you this morning. And he's not so worried about your physical appearance, but what he's worried about is how you're falling short inside. What areas of your life are you falling short in this morning? Where are you failing on a pretty regular basis? You may not be a thief and a liar like Zacchaeus, but you have areas in your life where you fall short every day. And I know that you have those areas because I have those same areas. I have areas in my life that I fall short every day, and Jesus comes through looking every day, seeking me out, calling me by name, and saying, hey, I want to go to your house. I want to spend some time with you. And if you'll just give me a few minutes, John, if you'll just give me a couple of minutes, I will change your life forever. Forever. Zacchaeus was changed. Through all of his shortcomings, he was changed. So what's your excuse this morning? Do you have that same desire to let him fix your shortcomings that Zacchaeus had? Do you even want it? There's nothing that I hate more than somebody griping about something that they're not willing to fix, that they're not willing to try to do something about. So you know you've got these areas, you know you've got these problems. Do you even have a desire to let Jesus spend some time with you and fix that? Maybe you've moved past the desire and you're just desperate. Maybe you're just desperate at this point. And you see all of these obstacles in your way, but you're so desperate, you'd say, you know, if I could just get to Jesus somehow. If I could just get to where I can somehow see Jesus. I'll be honest with you, I can't see him from where I am right now, John, but I'm desperate and I want to see him. I want to see Jesus work in my life. Are you willing to take those steps? Can you get over yourself enough to let that desperation's not always a bad thing. Desperation a lot of times drives the greatest inventions in the world. Desperation a lot of times solves the hardest problems. And in your Christian walk, desperation a lot of times is what it takes to get over the hurdle, to help you overcome those shortcomings. The Bible says in Romans 3:23 that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. I've fallen short and you've fallen short. And in my own personal life, I've been kind of taking an inventory of those places that I fall short. And I can tell you right now, I'm desperate enough. I'm desperate enough to run ahead of any crowd or to climb any tree or to do anything that I need to do to get past the obstacles that stand in my way. Because Jesus has called me by name. And Jesus has called you by name. And so I'm asking you, are you willing? Are you desperate enough to push past the obstacles in your life? Are you willing to be the person that He has called you to be? If so, this is your day. This is your moment. This is your time.